military support or security assistance. What would the consequence be for Israel if they went ahead and did that anyway?
I don't want to get into hypotheticals on that. We've been very clear with our Israeli counterparts privately and publicly about what our expectations are for the treatment of the innocent people that are down there near Rafah. And we're going to continue to, as I mentioned to Trevor, we're going to continue to support Israel. They have a right and responsibility to go after Hamas. We're going to make sure that they can continue to do that. But as from the very beginning, we want to make sure that they do that in a way that fully accounts for the preservation of innocent life and civilian infrastructure.
And just since the president is about to meet with a close ally that publicly supports a ceasefire in Gaza, can you just talk to us about whether the president's thinking on that has evolved at all? Is he a little bit closer to potentially supporting that publicly than, say, a month ago? Has his thinking on that evolved at all?
We haven't changed in terms of our desire to see an extended pause so that we can get all the hostages home with their families where they belong, so we can get additional security assistance in, and we can see a reduction in the violence. We are still focused on trying to get an extended humanitarian pause.
I'm asking about a permanent pause.
I know what you're asking. What I'm saying is we support and continue to support an extended humanitarian pause.
Thanks, Karine. Thanks, John. You talk, I know you can't give specifics about consequences, but I mean, would the United States policy change under any circumstances? You talk about an obligation to protect civilians. The president has talked about over-the-top, indiscriminate bombings. Is there anything, would there be any consequences? Would the U.S. policy change, or is it support no matter what?
I just won't get ahead of where we are right now, and I'm certainly not going to engage hypotheticals. We want to make sure Israel can continue to defend itself. We want to make sure that humanitarian assistance continues to flow to the people of Gaza, and by no means has there been enough. There needs to be more. And we want to get all those hostages home. We believe that the best way to accomplish those three goals is to get an extended pause in place, to bring the violence down, to get people out and get aid in, and that's what we're focused on. And I get the thrust of the question. I'm just not going to engage in hypotheticals about changes in policy.
Concern that you can give to the Israelis to help protect the civilians?
We have communicated, again, consistently and stridently since the beginning of the conflict. I mean, since the time the president went to Tel Aviv on the 17th of October, just a week or so after the attacks, how important it is that Israel knows it's going to have our support and that they do everything they can to protect innocent life.
On another question, if I may, why did the president allow his campaign, allow his campaign to go on TikTok despite the national security review of the platform?
I'd have to refer you to the campaign.
But I mean, it's still the president of the United States. He's still the president is sending a message to Americans about the safety of TikTok by doing this.
I'd have to refer you to the campaign on that decision.
Thanks, Karine. Thanks, Admiral. Sorry to press you on this issue of Rafah, but I mean, and you say we're not going to talk about possible halting military aid. You're not going to talk about consequences. What leverage does the White House actually have in terms of ensuring that Israel does not launch a military offensive in Rafah, without taking the necessary steps?
Well, I don't think you're all that sorry about pressing me on this, but I'll go ahead and. That's okay. It's all right. Look, it's not about leverage. It's about being consistent. And I've said it before just in the last few minutes. It's about being consistent about our desire to make sure Israel can defend itself so that October 7th can't happen again, which Hamas obviously wants to do. And it's being consistent about how they conduct those operations matter. And we have been consistent since the very beginning in talking to the Israelis about the how, about operations and how they're conducted. And I would tell you that throughout this conflict, there have been moments, and there continue to be moments, where we have the opportunity and have taken the opportunity to shape their thinking and to help influence the way they have conducted some of these operations, and that remains today.
Thank you. Hi, John. You referenced the release of 2 hostages, but also there is reports that in the process of this special operation, 3 hostages were killed, along with 100 Palestinians, including women and children. Also, Egypt threatened to withdraw from the Camp David agreement if Israel invaded Rafah. So how does the White House navigate this rather complex picture?
Yeah, I tried to address that in my opening statement, Nadia. We don't want to see any civilians killed at any time, Israeli or Palestinian, in the conduct of operations. the right number is 0. And so while we're very glad that 2 hostages are now back with their families where they belong, we certainly mourn any loss of innocent life as a result of those operations. And it just underscores, I think, a couple of things. One, and again, I can't validate the numbers. I've seen the reports, but I can't confirm them. But it does underscore 2 things. One, the difficulty of conducting military operations in such a closed-in urban environment where there are so many people, and as we talked about earlier, even more people now in the south in Rafah than there were before. So that's an added difficulty for the IDF. And number 2, it underscores the obligation that they have, and that they know they have, to be careful and discriminate and very deliberate in how they go after targets. Last thing on this, though, and I think it's an important point, and you didn't ask this, but we do know that Hamas leadership and fighters migrated south. They got pressured in the north, so they went down to Khan Yunis. Of course, they were already in Khan Yunis, but they kind of congregated there. And then as the Israelis put pressure on them in Khan Yunis, they gravitated further south now towards Rafah. By their very presence and their operations down there, they are further endangering the people of Gaza that are now settled or trying to find refuge down there in Rafah. So there are legitimate military targets that the Israelis are going to want to go after in Rafah. Again, we just urge them, as we have, to be careful.
I also want to ask you, the President comments, he referenced over the top, and he also said that Israel indiscriminately killing people in Gaza. Yet he's willing to sign off on almost $14 billion in military aid. So how can you reconcile the fact that he's worried about civilian casualties without any serious review about how U.S. weapons are used in a civilian area?
Well, I think we just last week, late in the week, we issued a national security memorandum that codifies existing policies and adds reporting requirements onto those existing policies about our expectations for how military assistance is going to be provided to any foreign actor, and of course that includes Israel.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Just to jump off of Nadia's question, you've been explicit that the U.S. does not support an operation into Rafah without a credible, feasible plan to move and protect civilians. Yesterday's operation, as you've also acknowledged, there were reports of civilian casualties. But was the operation yesterday within the grounds of the kind of operation that the U.S. would support in Rafah?
I can't really speak to the specifics of IDF operations. I won't do that. They should speak to the operations that they conduct and what that looks like. As I understand that, again, this is rudimentary and early information. This was a specific military raid to rescue hostages and not necessarily indicative of some larger operation that they have talked about conducting in Rafah to root out Hamas leaders that have now tried to find refuge among the 1 million or so Palestinians that are there.
Yeah, so just in terms of what the U.S. would support, is it a question of scale? Is it a question of more targeted operations like this are okay despite possible civilian casualties, whereas a mass operation is not okay? Like just in terms of U.S. support.
Well, with the caveat that this is a sovereign nation we're talking about, and they get to decide what military operations they're going to conduct. What we've said is we wouldn't support operations given the current circumstances, where you have, again, more than 1 million people there with nowhere to go and no plan for some place for them to go so that they can be safe. So we look forward to continuing talking to our Israeli counterparts about what that could look like.
Thanks so much. John, on TikTok, can you explain what are the national security concerns that the administration has about TikTok?
As you know, it's not approved for use on government devices, and that remains the case today. And I think, again, I don't want to get into too much of the national security technical reasons behind that, but it does have to do with concerns about the preservation of data and the potential misuse of that data and privacy information by foreign actors. I think that's as far as I can go.
It's wise for people to use TikTok?
Again, that's not something that I'm qualified to say from the National Security Council. All I can tell you is it's banned on U.S. government devices, and we follow that guidance.
So yesterday was the second anniversary of the Biden-Harris administration, the Indo-Pacific strategy. We have a statement from the NSC, but I'm just wondering how you see the progress so far. Are you satisfied with the progress?
I think we've made a lot of progress. I mean, we've initiated AUKUS And that process is moving along on schedule to get Australia nuclear-powered submarine capability. We've elevated the Quad, the Indo-Pacific Quad. We've upgraded our relationships with Vietnam, with Indonesia, and with ASEAN. And of course, as you know, the president hosted the leaders of Japan and South Korea at Camp David and really got not only significant developments in terms of our bilateral relationship with each country, each ally, but improved opportunities to get trilateral cooperation in a much better place than it's ever been. I could go on, including adding capabilities in and around the Korean Peninsula to keep a better eye on what Kim Jong-un is doing, and of course, bolstering all the rest of our alliances and network and partnerships in the region.
Does the U.S. believe that all of the remaining hostages are being held in Rafah? And if so, given that that would include Americans, are there requests by U.S. officials to the Israelis for any assurances for protection of those hostages?
We sadly don't have a whole lot of specific information about where each of the hostages are, who's holding them, and in what condition they might be. And sadly, we have to accept the possibility that some of them are no longer alive. We just don't have terrific granularity on that. We are in constant conversations with our Israeli counterparts about what they know. Certainly we remain in touch with the families of the American hostages. I think Jake Sullivan just met with them a week or so ago. We'll maintain constant touch with them and try to get as much information as we can. But obviously, the whole reason we're trying to get this deal in place is so that you can provide for the safe and secure passage of hostages out. Yes, it's true, and we're glad that 2 hostages were rescued, but by and large, the greatest number of hostages safely released were done through a hostage deal, right? A pause in the fighting where they were able to go, and that's why we're putting so much effort into these current negotiations. We believe that's the best way to get hostages in greater numbers out safely.
Thank you, John. I have a question about Afghanistan and then one about Lunar New Year. Starting with Afghanistan, the UN is holding its 2nd international conference on Afghanistan since the Taliban took power back. That's happening next week in Doha. So I just wonder, what are the administration's expectations from this gathering, and do you see this as a move to normalize the Taliban?
There are no efforts by the United States government to quote-unquote normalize, as you put it, or to recognize the Taliban officially. We've said it numerous times. If they want to be seen as legitimate rulers, they need to meet all the commitments that they said they would meet and make, and they haven't done that.
Should be holding this meeting then.
I will let the Secretary General speak for what meetings the UN's holding. Nothing's changed about our policy when it comes to the Taliban.
And very quickly, happy year of the dragon. It's a happy year for you, a rabbit. But you are a rabbit. You were born in 1963. Yes, you are.
I have a follow-up.
About me being a rabbit? All right, thank you. I did not know that, but I appreciate that very much.
He's a horse. It's supposed to be a prosperous year for him. What is the president's message for the 20 million Asian Americans who celebrated this holiday over the weekend? He hasn't issued a message. What is his message?
We have actually, I think, put something on social media about the Lunar New Year. And of course, we're wishing everybody who observes the Lunar New Year a happy one and a prosperous one. Even the rabbits.
Admiral, I wanted to clarify the position on TikTok. So the administration still has concerns, security concerns about TikTok, even though the campaign has now joined it?
Again, I cannot speak, nor will I speak for the campaign. I can't do that or their decisions. Nothing's changed about the national security concerns from the NSC's perspective about the use of TikTok on government devices. That policy is still in place.
But surely there must have been some conversation between the White House here and the campaign on whether it was appropriate for the campaign to use it.
I can't speak to that.
Jackie, last one. Thank you, Karine. John, just following up on this TikTok stuff. Is the CFIUS review still happening?
I'd have to refer you to CFIUS. I'm not in a position to confirm one way or another what they're looking at.
So is the administration still weighing a ban on TikTok?
Again, I have nothing for you on that, Jackie. I mean, I'd have to refer you to CFIUS. All I can speak to credibly, which I have today, is that from an NSC perspective, there are still national security concerns about the use of TikTok on government devices, and there's been no change to our policy not to allow that.
Can you help me understand though, like why there wouldn't be any communication between CFIUS and the administration broadly? I mean, the National Security Council.
I didn't say there wasn't. I just said I'm not able to speak to issues regarding CFIUS. You'd have to talk to them. It's an independent body, and it's not something I can't speak for them.
I think we're all just trying to square why the president would use this platform that his administration is weighing a national ban on because of national security concerns.
Again, I'm not going to speak to any hypothetical ban. I can only tell you that it's not allowed on government devices. That policy remains the case, and I just can't speak for the campaign or their decisions. I apologize.
Thank you so much, Admiral. Thank you. All right. Go ahead, Zeke.
It's great. Just another round of that TikTok question. Are you aware of any communication between the Biden campaign and anyone who works in the White House about the president joining TikTok?
Look, I can't speak to any conversations on specifically on TikTok. We got to be really careful. The campaign 2024 can't. No, hold on. So we're not going to comment on any specifics, and so certainly we would defer to the campaign on any strategy. The CFIUS process is separate and not going to get ahead of what we're going to say here. And I would say that the administration is on record for supporting the Restrict Act, as you all know, something that came up last year, and it's a bipartisan bill, and it is indeed tailored and risk-based approach so we can protect Americans' freedom of speech, and that's what matters. As you know, there are folks here who are commissioned officers who certain people are allowed to have conversation with the campaign, but I can't speak to any specific conversations that are happening about this particular issue. Again, it's under CFIUS review. We want to be really mindful and not getting ahead of that, and also it's the campaign, so that is something that they would have to speak to. And the reason why it is banned on government phones or government properties, obviously devices, is because that is an act of Congress. That is something that Congress wanted to put forward to make sure that no government devices are used.
Were you aware before the campaign posted that TikTok? Okay.
No, I am very, very careful as the White House press secretary. I'm in a different kind of different box than most, and so I do not communicate with the campaign on any strategy or anything like that. And so I'm just very, very mindful of that. I did not know. I knew as you all did.
And then a few follow-ups on the special counsel's report last week. When Ian Sams was here on Friday, he said the White House was considering releasing the transcript of the president's interview with the special counsel, which you all have objected to that characterization of that. Do you have an update on that review process?
So look, certainly I'm going to refer you to my colleagues at the White House Counsel. I know the president's personal attorney obviously spoke to this on one of the Sunday shows yesterday. So I know they've been responsive. The team here have been responsive to those specific questions. I just don't have anything to share.
Also, there's discussion about the president's ordering the creation of a task force to change policies around the handling of classified information in a presidential transition. Do you have any updates on when the president will create that task force?
So I don't have any updates on that particular question about the task force.
The president's personal notes from his time as vice president were among those items that were reviewed by the special counsel and the interagency and found to contain classified, in some cases, highly classified information. Does the president still keep a diary and notebooks now?
Look, that particular question, obviously, the White House counsel would be able to speak to more directly, but I do want to remind everyone that this was a 15-month investigation, and I think the outcome of that investigation, obviously, as it's stated, is that the special counsel has not found nothing to prosecute, and I think that's important to note. Anything beyond that, any specific questions about diary or anything like that, I would have to refer you to the White House counsel.
Lastly, when the president hosts the King later, they're going to be making statements. Why isn't the president, and given all of these questions about the special counsel and otherwise, why isn't he taking questions?
I mean, look,
let's be clear. The day that the special counsel report came out, the president came out in the evening and took and made a statement and took questions. He wanted to make sure that you all heard from him directly. And so I want to be really, let's not forget that that did occur on the day that the report came out. Look, the president is looking forward to welcoming the king, King Abdullah, to the White House. He comes here every year, as you all know, during his presidency, and so he looks certainly forward to welcoming the king. So that said, and I said this last week, and I'll just reiterate, there are a variety of factors that go into decision making, that go into press, if there is going to be a press conference or not during foreign leaders. It depends on those conversations that we have with the foreign leaders and how that works out. Look, you're going to hear from the president. You're going to hear from the king later today around 4 o'clock. I think that's important. You hear directly from them. There's just not a press conference component to this. Not every trip, not every visit with a foreign leader has a press conference component. As I stated, King Abdullah has been here almost every year during this president's tenure, and that has not been the case. A 2+2 has not been the case.
I want to follow up on that real quick because you mentioned that on Friday, the German chancellor gave a press conference across the street in Lafayette Park. It seems the White House here is the roadblock.
Look, that is something for the German chancellor to speak to as to their government, why they chose to do that. I can't speak to that. There are two, obviously, when a foreign leader comes, there are two governments that have this discussion. They go through the process of what they want that trip to look like when they're here at the White House, and there are different various factors that play into that. And so every trip is different. Every trip is different. And with this particular trip, King Abdullah, every time he's been here, there has not been a 2+2. So that I would remind you all of that as well.
Thanks, Karine. A new ABC News Ipsos poll shows that 86% of Americans think Biden is too old to serve another term. That is a higher percentage than what we found in a previous poll in September. So clearly polling shows this is a persistent issue. What is the White House strategy to try and change that perception?
So look, we're going to continue to lead on leadership, right? We're going to continue to focus on what this president has been able to get done, what the president has been able to get done on behalf of the American people. And look, I'll quote a little bit of what the First Lady said, I think incredibly well, just a couple days ago. President Biden does more in 1 hour than most people do in a day. His age with experience and expertise is an incredible asset, and he proves it every day. And that's what we believe. We believe that his age and his experience, because he was a senator, because he was obviously vice president, because he has these long decades of relationships with leaders, obviously across the globe, and what he's been able to do, that's what we're going to lean into. That's what we're going to speak to. We're going to speak to how he turned the economy back on its feet. We're going to speak to the 14.8 million jobs that he was able to create, how unemployment is at under 4%, how he's able to beat Big Pharma because Medicare can now negotiate and lower costs for the American people. That's what we're going to focus on, and I think that's the most important thing at this moment, at this time, is delivering for the American people and continuing to do that.
And bouncing off of the previous question, the numbers show that President Biden has engaged in about 33 news conferences. Compare that to Obama's 66 and Donald Trump's 52 by this time in their presidencies. Can you explain why the president isn't doing?
So look, yeah, and I hear the question, and I know that folks want to hear you all, and it's important because when you all hear from the president, obviously, so does the American people. So we get the importance of that, and we're always going to try to find ways, obviously outside of press conferences as well, for the president to be out there. And we have found some non-traditional ways. We think it's important to try and meet the American people where they are, and so that is important as well. Whether it's a podcast that's important, or doing certain things that is not the norm. Obviously, the president, I should say, takes your questions when he's on the road as more often than not, and he finds it important to have those conversations when you all are out there with him on the road taking your questions, and so he does do that. As far as press conferences, we're going to try and make sure when it's the right time for those to happen. Certainly we will do so, but it doesn't mean that this president does not engage with the press corps, with the White House press corps, or with other reporters journalists out there who have different ways of communicating with the American people as well. We think that's important too.
But why is it more effective to forego a Super Bowl interview and instead?
Look, we've talked about this. We've talked about this. We believe that it is an important, obviously, tradition to watch the Super Bowl, and we think there are different ways to communicate with the American people, and we're going to try and find different ways to meet the American people where they are, and so that's a choice that we've made here that we think is actually important and effective.
Karine, there was some reporting this morning that President Biden told some campaign donors that Prime Minister Netanyahu, quote, has been a pain in my ass lately, or, quote, he's been killing me lately. The reason we don't know what the exact quote is because the press was not in that meeting that the president had with these donors. Why is the president not living up to his full transparency pledge in terms of opening all meetings with donors to the press?
So I think that, first of all, I want to be careful, these are campaign events, so I just want to be mindful, can't speak to each of them, or really most of them. I know that, and as you know, when the president does speak in front of, when he does do some of these fundraising events, right, there is, when he gives remarks, formal remarks, the press pool is in there, and they are listening to the remarks and get to hear directly what the president says. So I think that's also very important. I don't want to make it sound like there is not a process there, that when he is in front of donors giving formal remarks that you all are not in the room as he's speaking. I can't speak to this particular scenario. I think that is something certainly, he does have private meetings, that is true. And when he has those private meetings, so that there's candor and honesty, and so that he can hear directly from folks, those tend to be private. But I want to be really careful here in speaking into every scenario that happens, because I can't speak to that particular scenario.
Should the President of the United States be engaging privately with a random set of financial donors about issues that are of clear public import, like his opinion of the Israeli
No, I hear your question, but the president has private meetings all the time. He does. He has private meetings all the time.
And these aren't foreign leaders, right? These are people who are giving money to him, his campaign.
I hear you, but he has private meetings with everyday people. Some of these donors have, and I want to be super mindful here, have concerns, right, as well, just like everyday American people that he has private meetings with or he sees on the road. It's not every meeting it's going to be public, but when he gives remarks at fundraisers, there is formal remarks. There is the press pool tends to be in the room or is in the room. Private meetings are different, and so that's the way it's been for the past 3 years under this administration. Look, I want to be really careful. These are campaign, obviously, some of them campaign DNC related meetings. So I just want to be super mindful here.
And what's the distinction between formal and informal remarks?
Look, I'm going to refer you on anything that's related to these specific meetings. I would refer you to the campaign, because they're the ones that put it together. They're the ones that bring the folks in the room. I just want to be super mindful and not go down too far a rabbit hole here. Okay, MJ.
Hey, Karine, any updates on when the president's physical might be taking place?
So he will have a physical when we have information on that. So obviously, we will certainly share that with all of you. It will be transparent. There will be a comprehensive report, as we have done the last 2 years. Just don't have a timeline for you.
Do you plan on the press getting a heads up before the physical happens, or will we find out once it has taken place?
We're going to do it the way that we've done it the last 2 years. It's not going to be anything different. So the way that we've approached this the last 2 years will be the same way that we do this this third year.
Does the White House think that the idea of the president taking a cognitive test as a part of this physical is a legitimate idea, particularly just on the heels of the special counsel report, more polling, as my colleague Selena just mentioned, showing that many American people have concerns about that?
Look, I got this question last week as well, and I'm just going to say what Dr. O'Connor, it's kind of what he said to me about a year ago when the report came out last year, obviously on his physical, which is the president proves every day how he operates. how he thinks, right? But by dealing with world leaders, by making really difficult decisions on behalf of the American people, whether it's domestic, whether it's national security. And so he shows it every day on how he thinks, how he operates. And so that is how Dr. O'Connor sees it, and that's how I'm going to leave it.
What do you think about the idea of taking that kind of a test?
I mean, look, and I talked about this last week too on I believe, on Friday. I have known this president since 2009. He is not just my boss, he's also a mentor to me. And I spent sometimes countless hours with him, whether it's in the Oval Office, whether it's on the road. And I believe, for me, you're asking me my personal opinion, he is sharp. He is on top of things. When we have meetings with him, with his staff, he's constantly pushing us, trying to get more information. And so that has been my experience with this president. Anything else outside of that, I just shared with you what Dr. O'Connor said to me, and so I'll just leave it there.
Thanks, Karine. No, you're not going to comment on the campaign or its decisions, but does the White House believe that TikTok is giving Americans, especially younger Americans, false perceptions about President Biden and his broader agenda?
Look, I'm going to be really careful about speaking to TikTok specifically because there is a CFIUS review. They're in an independent body, and they are going to move forward with whatever they decide to do, and so don't want to step into that. Obviously, more broadly, as it relates to social media platforms, we've always said there is misinformation, disinformation out there that we have to try and combat, and so we've always been very clear. We've always been concerned about our young people and the information the misinformation, disinformation that they're getting, and how that's affecting their lives. That is a concern that we have, and we've talked about that very explicitly, very clearly. As it relates to TikTok, going to be really careful because of that CFIUS review, and so just want to be super, super mindful. Obviously, just not going to comment on specific cases.
Separately, the Senate is on track to pass the National Security Supplemental this week. Still not clear if Speaker Johnson's going to bring that up for a vote in the House. Does the president plan to have any outreach with House Republican leadership to try to get that across the finish line?
So look, you know how important the president thinks it is to get that very all-important funding, security assistance to Ukraine, obviously Israel, Indo-Pacific. We've been very clear about that. Obviously, we had this really careful, strategic conversations as well with Senate Republicans and Democrats for the past couple of months for the border security, because we believe that entire package was important. But obviously, Republicans specifically in the House got in the way and would not move that forward. And it's unfortunate because that is the way we believe we would have been able to deal with policy issues and funding issues as it relates to the border, the challenges at the border, and also immigration. So look, we are in constant communication. The team here, the Office of Legislative Affairs, and other White House officials are in constant communication, obviously with leadership on both sides of chamber, in each chamber, to try and figure out how we're going to move forward, how we're going to make sure that this all-important funding gets out there. And so conversations are going to continue. We are obviously, what we wanted to see is the border security component, negotiation piece of that to be included, but we are where we are, and we believe it's important. It's important to move forward.
But would the president get directly involved in those conversations?
I don't have any conversations to read out. Obviously, he tends to have private conversations. We don't read out every conversation. He has relationships with folks in Congress, but his Office of Legislative Affairs and other White House officials are in regular touch with congressional leadership, and they also keep the president updated as well, which is important. Okay.
Thanks. Just two things. The first, on the guidance we got for the week, there were public events for the president today and on Friday. I was hoping you might be able to give us a sense on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, as you make the case that the president has a lot of vigor and is doing a lot of things. what is the way you got?
So let me just talk about Friday a little bit, because I think I know that an advisory went out over the weekend about East Palestine. All of you know that he's going to be going to East Palestine on Friday. He's going to be traveling there, and it's because of the invitation that he received from the mayor. So it's going to be really important. And while the president's on the ground, he'll get a briefing on the ongoing response and speak to the administration's work to keep Norfolk Suffolk accountable, which is incredibly important, and support the community as it moves forward. He also has heard loud and clear from the folks in East Palestine seen that they don't want to be defined by an event, and so he'll speak to the administration's work to deliver on the needs for family businesses that are affected. And let's not forget there's the Bipartisan Railway Safety Act that he's going to continue to call on Congress to move forward on. So that is going to be a really important trip. You are correct about that. The president will be out there meeting directly with the American people. I don't have anything yet for tomorrow, Wednesday, or Thursday. Obviously, when things move or we have something to share, we'll certainly put that out there on the daily guidance. And obviously, there's some movement happening in Congress as well that we're keeping a close eye on. And so once we have more to share, we'll have more to share on that.
And then secondly, you started the briefing by wishing congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs as well as to all the Swifties out there. I'm wondering, when the Chiefs are invited to the White House, does the White House intend to also invite Taylor Swift?
That's going to be up to the Chiefs and obviously their decision to figure out who's going to come with them when they come. And as you know, it's a White House tradition. I can't speak to attendance and who will be here, but we look forward. We look forward to having them here, and obviously we congratulate them on a great win. Okay, Annie.
Thanks so much. You talked a lot about how, and the president says this too, that people should watch him when there are questions about his age. And the issue seems to be that they are watching him in public events, in some press conferences, and are coming to this conclusion, many of them, that he's too old. So what I'm wondering is he behaving differently behind closed doors? Because we don't get to see that at all. And do you see, and when you interact with him privately, is there kind of a different sort of level of vigor that is perhaps not as visible when we're all seeing him publicly?
So let me just first say, and I was on the swing with him recently, right? He went to Wisconsin, he went to Michigan, he went to California, he went to Vegas, and he's going to go to Ohio later this week. And so he visited small businesses, and he met with people on the road, obviously, and spent hours with them. So folks have seen him, and you all have seen him yourselves as you cover this president. And so you see him interact, you see him engage. And even when he was in Vegas, he took some questions that you all had, and that and answer. He tends to answer them in a light way, a funny way, and is sharp with his answers to some of you about that. And so look, and he's also meeting with world leaders. He did that with the German Chancellor. He's obviously going to do this today with King Abdullah. And I spoke already about my experience with him. And just to answer your question, I've spent countless hours with this president, whether in the Oval Office or on the road. And I have to say, he's sharp, he's engaged, he pushes us for information.
Like emails at like 2 o'clock in the morning, or is there any sort of
I think
a finer point on what it is exactly that you see that somehow isn't coming across to the rest of the American people?
Look, I think the fact that when he meets with his team, when he meets with staff, he is, as I said, incredibly engaged. As I said, very sharp, and ask us back and forth. We go back and forth on whatever information, whatever is maybe the news of the day that's on his mind, and it happens very often. Yeah. And so that's my experience with him. But you all see him on the road. I mean, he was, when we were in Vegas, he was asked about, he was asked a specific question about the former president. And he answered that in a fun, sharp, kind of way. And that's him. That is him. What you see there is him. And so, look, I think, and I do want to step back for a second, because I think what's so very important too is this president's record in the last 3 years and what he's been able to get done, and that matters. And so, yes, we're going to continue to be out there. The president's going to continue to do everything that he can to speak directly to the American people, and we believe that is what's important here. Getting that work done, continuing to move forward in an impressive record in the last 3 years, especially for any modern president, whether it's dealing with infrastructure, whether it's dealing with beating big pharma, whether it's getting the economy back on its feet. All of these things are important. Let's not forget what's going on outside of this country, what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East. This is something that the president has been able to do in a pretty effective way.
And then just to follow up quickly on Matt's question, when Super Bowl teams are invited to the White House, do they typically have a +1?
Actually, that's a good question. I can't answer that right now. But look, we are looking forward to having them here, the Chiefs, and they it was a great win, and just like we do in every it's a White House tradition to have the winners of the Super Bowl here, and so we're looking forward to it. Okay, I haven't called any yet. Again.
Is the White House doing anything to move the stalled child and biz tax bill in the Senate?
Say that one more time.
Is the White House doing anything to move forward the stalled child and biz tax bill in the Senate?
So, as you know, the president supports that bipartisan legislation. We've talked about it in here before. There's always conversations that we're having with congressional leadership and staff on obviously important pieces of legislation that matters to the American people. I don't have anything to read out, but obviously we're in support of that particular legislation. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Shrinkflation and the president's video from this weekend in inflation. So, thanks, Karine, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
The president is blaming companies again now, it seems, for inflation. And based on his policies, though, does the president accept any responsibility for where prices are since he came into office?
So a couple of things. Look, we understand how grocery prices are a major concern for hardworking families. We get it. We get that there are the prices are still, kind of hurting Americans. But what we've seen is that prices have gone down for eggs, for milk, for seafood, and that's important. They're lower than they were a year ago, and we know that's not enough. And so what the president has continuously done, and you see this in this video that you're speaking of, he's called on large corporations to pass their savings onto hardworking Americans. That's what we're doing, and I think that's important that this president sees that. And then in shrinkflation, for folks who are watching doesn't quite know what that is, what we're seeing is the size of a product gets smaller even as the prices stays the same, and that shouldn't be. And so the president's going to call that, and it's and what you're seeing, it's giving families less for their bang, for their buck, if you think about that. And so the president has said, and I quote, he's tired of seeing the American people being played for suckers, and that is something he's not going to allow. But as it relates to what the president's going to continue to do, he's going to continue to do everything that he can to lower costs for the American people, and you've seen him do that.
And on his doctor, when can we talk to the president's doctor, and how come they haven't been asked to come out here and talk with us, given the Her report that challenges the president's mental fitness?
So look, just to speak to the Her report really, really quickly. Special Counsel Her is, as far as I remember, is obviously a Republican, a prosecutor. He's not a medical doctor. He's just not. It's not for him to speak to. It's just not. And you've heard from over the past couple of days since the report has been out, you've heard from legal experts from across the ideological spectrum, even a former attorney general, and he says, and they have come out to say that the stuff in this report that is capturing all of your attention right now is just wrong. It's flatly wrong. It is inappropriate. It is gratuitous. And so going to leave that there, and it is obviously up for a medical doctor to decide on that.
Can we talk to his doctor then?
But look, I have said the medical doctor, the president's doctor, is going to do a physical. He's going to, and he has always put forth in the last 2 years a detailed memo on the president's obviously medical physical, and so I'm just going to leave it there. I don't have anything else to add. Go ahead, Jared.
Just curious to sort of follow up and get some clarity. If these transcripts were released, who makes that? Is that the counsel's office?
I don't have anything else to share. That's something that the councils could speak to. They've been answering those questions for the past couple of days. They have to speak to that.
Has President Biden expressed a desire to have the full transcripts released?
You have to speak to the council. They've been answering these questions for the past couple of days of incoming on this particular question on the transcript. They have to speak to that. Very good, Brian.
Thanks a lot. As you know, at the beginning of March, the funding for the government runs out. What's the president been doing to avoid a government shutdown and make sure that the funding is going to be there at the beginning of March to fund important programs like WIC and SNAP?
Yeah, the president thinks that those programs should be funded. The president thinks that Congress should do their jobs and do the basic part of their jobs and fund that, fund these incredibly important programs that the American family believe in or need just to survive. And so that's what the president wants to see Congress get to it, do their job, and make sure that the government does not shut down. He did his job. The president did his job a couple months ago, back in the spring of actually last year, not even a couple of months ago, and brokered a deal with Congress, both the House and the Senate, to get a bipartisan deal forward to make sure that this is during the deficit, remember, and the debt ceiling. And so he brokered that deal. It became law because 2/3 of the House Republicans voted for it. It got a bipartisan support in the Senate. And that was the deal that he brokered. Now Congress needs to get there to get this done.
Has he designated a negotiating team that he wants involved in the White House?
We negotiated on this, Brian. We did. We negotiated on this. 2/3 of House Republicans voted for it, a bipartisan support from the Senate, and Congress should do their basic job, which is keep the government open and make sure these very important programs that you just listed out gets funded. All right, guys, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.